Hello folks, today we're making Saturn. Saturn is one of the best planets to make in CG because you can get really good results really quickly. So this one that's showing on the screen right now, this is going to be the end result of this shader. It took about 6 seconds per frame to render, which is pretty nice. So let's get started. Alright folks, so the first thing that you need to do in any project is to collect your references. So I've got a pretty basic PureRef setup. This is going to be the shot I'm focusing on most, but you want to make sure you collect a couple different angles. So we got this one from the front, this one from, well, I mean, these are actually kind of the same angle, just different sort of rotation. Ideally you would want to have a shot from like under the rings or something, but I also collected this shot just sort of see what the atmosphere looks like. And another thing you want to make sure when you're collecting references is make sure the compositing and stuff is the same, like the color grading. Not compositing, what am I saying? So I wasn't able to perfectly match these up, but it's fine, more or less. That's basically just so that you can give yourself a consistent color palette. Anyways, let's get on to working in Blender. And this will be, as I said before, the primary focus. And I rendered out some stuff for the intro that looks kind of like this. So, alright folks, let's get to it. Alright, so I'm spherifying the default cube after subdividing it quite a bit. Make sure you have enough geometry. You don't want shading artifacts. This is a common question, by the way. Shading artifacts in the atmosphere are usually due to not enough geometry. Yeah, so make sure that's it's all good. So I just set the sunlight to the center. I'm changing the strength and everything, and make sure it's oriented properly. You can always change the lighting later, but it's good to have good previews for the lighting. Obviously set the background to black, then add in your Saturn texture. I'll leave links to where you can download these in the description, and you're going to want to set the UVs to generate it and then sphere project it. You can mess with the roughness. I like to set it to 0 because it's a little bit softer, and obviously no specular. Then I'm duplicating the sphere, and then I'm duplicating the material as well. We want to make the atmosphere material. So delete everything from the surface material, and then we're gonna start by making a sort of simple gradient. And I'm going to use displacement instead of scaling the actual sphere up. So I just added a value node and connecting it to a displacement node, and then I set the mid-level to 0, and it should go black because there's no material, and it should cover the whole thing. So I'm adding an absorption and scattering setup, just connecting those two with an add shader, and then connecting that to the volume. So the color doesn't matter too much right now, you just want to get the density right. I'm moving that node back a little bit just so that we have a little bit more room to work with. And then I'm going to add in the texture coordinate, and then a length coming out of the object, and that's basically just gonna so we're gonna subtract 1 from that length, and that's gonna set to return 0 at the surface level. So it's just sort of giving us a proper height function for the atmosphere, so that we can determine how to shade it based on that. In order to do that though, we need to divide by the atmosphere thickness. That way it is set to 1 when the atmosphere has completely terminated, so we don't want it intersecting too badly with the volume domain. And then I'm just doing some math. This power node is important because it gives us an exponential fall off, which is how atmospheres work more or less in the real world. And then just add a couple multiplies and stuff, and that's just going to control the density and all that fun stuff. Because as you can see, the density of the atmosphere is wanting, to say the least. And then I connect that to the density first of the volume scatter, and then later the absorption. And also make sure you have low volume steps. The volume is pretty thin, so it's not going to hamper your performance too much. But it will aid the shading. And I'm also connecting a multiply node to the end of that, and then connecting that to the density of the absorption. That's basically just to give us a little bit more control. So I'm calling that the absorption amount because it's going to scale proportional to the atmosphere thickness, or not thickness, density. And then I'm changing the thickness up a little bit just so that it's a little bit more realistic. And basically it comes down to fiddling with the colors a lot. It's not a very precise process. There is just a ton of figuring shit out that goes on, and fiddling with values. That is most of node work and stuff. It's actually not all that interesting. The initial ideas of how to do stuff are always the hardest part to come up with. Important is adding some anisotropy to the atmosphere. Most atmospheres do not scatter light uniformly. They scatter it a little bit back. If you're looking, so that's why the atmosphere of Earth, for instance, looks the way it does, because there's more light being scattered towards you. If the sun is, if you're looking at the sun, than if you're looking away from the sun. But also, anisotropy will darken the atmosphere in most places, so especially if you're looking at it from the front, and we're going to solve that in a little bit. Basically, you can add in volume bounces, which will sort of soften the volumetric light. So I'm looking back at the reference just to sort of get a feel for how this atmosphere is supposed to be constructed. Very important to keep in mind your references. You don't want to do too much without consulting them. So more fiddling with values, all that other stuff. So one thing you'll notice is that I've set the volume bounces to be 64, and also set the volume or total bounces to be 64. That's going to brighten up the atmosphere nicely. It's also going to make it look a little bit less dense, because for one, high anisotropy, and for two, the light is sort of going a little bit straighter through the atmosphere. So for instance, the surface peaks a little bit more through. It gets a little bit blurred as opposed to just completely diffused. So now it is time for the rings. So I'm just adding a circle. I deleted the first one just to add more vertices, because I mean, it's just important that you kind of have consistent detail. So extrude it, scale it in, just give it a flat surface, and should be good. You can see it's already softening the light on the atmosphere a little bit more, which is pretty fun. So I'm going to delete the principled, add in a glossy. Actually, that'll come later. Let's first start with just getting the density of the rings right. So I'm adding a length node to, this is the same sort of trick we did in the atmosphere, to get it to properly map via radii or whatever. So then I add in a color ramp, and you can see that sort of squishing the rings in and out to where you want them. And there we go. We have the texture mapped properly, at least. So I'm going to take a math node. I'm going to subtract a 1 from the entire thing. And then I'm going to plug this into a power. And this is going to show basically a quick way to determine how much light is making it through the rings at any given point. And then, as we're going to see in a second, we're going to plug this into a transparent shader. Transparent BSDF. You can see it's casting shadows appropriately. And the power will determine how strong the effect is. So I'm going to add a mix shader. So we need to mix, I'm going to, instead of setting that into the color, I'm going to put that into the factor and set the transparent to be the second shader. And then you can see if we connect up a diffuse shader, we get very basic rings. Now, unfortunately, as you can see where I was pointing, we don't have any light really passing through. So we want to add in another shader, an add shader, and also a translucency BSDF. And this is just going to collect some of the light that's passing through. So we will obviously also want to make it so that it's still absorbing some light, which is why we're using those power nodes. And I added another one just so that we can control it a little bit more. And that is pretty cool. You can see we can control the density. One thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a normalize node. And this is just going to essentially give us a little bit more light because we're already essentially multiplying the the texture when we're combining it with the transparent. So by normalizing it, we get a little bit more bang for our buck there. And then I'm adding in a little bit of color ramp because the texture wasn't perfect, so we got a little bit of stuff bleeding through at the edges. So you may notice we have some texture resolution issues, which is why I'm adding a noise texture in here. So this is gonna high scale, high frequency noise texture. We'll just add a little bit more detail to the rings. So you can see we're already getting that detail, and then I'm going to turn it up a little bit more. And that's pretty cool. These rings are looking pretty fire. So I'm adding a scale vector math node just so we can control the amount of light that peeks through in the translucent a little bit more because it's quite bright. So now I'm setting up the camera just to get a nice beauty shot. I later decide to correct the angle, and I'm going back into PureRef to check the angle so that it looks a little bit more like the reference image. And again, more tweaking. All this is just tweaking. It's tweaking, bro. I don't know what I'm doing there. Sometimes it's like that. Correcting the lighting and such. And again, consulting the reference for angles and all that fun stuff. It really does come down to just playing with settings. That is most of 3D art. That's an important lesson to take away. There's very rarely a time when I'm just when I'm like full throttle ahead problem solving. A lot of the time is really just fiddling with settings to get something that looks good. I think that's a reasonable takeaway. Because most people think that a lot of the skill in a 3D artist comes from your problem solving ability, and to a degree that is a thing that does matter, but really just how you can control the subtle details via your or through your texture fiddling and all the precise little tweaks that you make, that's really what elevates your skill. So I'm using the curves to add a little bit more blue and green light into this, so that it looks a little bit more like a reference. And then you can play with the color management stuff to see what you want. I think it's just set at default. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to crush the samples down a little bit and then do a good render. Also messing with render settings. So I'm just going to kill the adaptive sampling for now, because I don't think it's really adding much. So see, the render's pretty fast. I cut out a lot of the rendering because 30 seconds of wasted time. But that is like, it's a reasonably fast render. And you could probably optimize it even more for animations and such. So save your files as well. So I want to take this time to show off the planet shader I've been working on for a while. So I built a gas giant optimized build. So right now it doesn't really look as good as a ground truth sort of basic Blender thing. That's because I haven't implemented a lot of the features yet, but the rings do already look better and the atmosphere is getting there. It takes a lot less samples, which is neat. So it renders actually about the same, but you can get pretty neat results and do a couple more things. This is going to come later than the actual thing because it's sort of a side project. The rings also, the rings look so much better. Look at that, they shimmer and stuff. You can get better rings if you take a little bit more time to work with them. But for now, without adding in anisotropy and all that fun stuff, I think this is pretty good. What we made in this tutorial. Anyways, I just wanted to show this off a little bit. Just messing with some settings. I made this thing in like 15 minutes the other day. Not this shader, but this specific planet. So it's not perfect, and it certainly could use some work. For instance, the rings don't reflect back on the planet, which is slightly unfortunate, but you know what? I'm pretty happy with it. And it does look pretty cool. It's a lot less noisy. Oh, it does render. Each sample is a little bit slower. But this is just a little bit just to show you guys sort of how it looks fiddling around with it, the GUI and all that fun stuff. I'm making a tutorial on how to use it, or at least the basics of it, making some cumulus clouds. That's gonna come out later this week. I've had some production delays. Yeah, there we go. I'm just changing the lighting. Also, I want to take this time to plug the Discord and the Patreon. This planet will be up on Patreon, the file for this tutorial. And, well, the Discord is where pretty much the whole community goes to chill and hang out and all that stuff. So, we host competitions. I'm on there constantly. So you guys can message me, ask me shit. Don't ping me incessantly, please, but you know what? Have fun. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And yeah, I'll see you guys.